we see this confusion a lot too in like the indie game space. Is in essence indie devs trying to sell their games to each other, right?
Yeah.
And
which really you're just helping the platform in the middle take 30% of your money as you just move it around between each other.
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 420.
Blaze it.
Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam and I'm the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Sam, and I'm not a programmer.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today's June 16th, 20 Jubilee. Before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be profanity in this show, and probably going to talk about weed.
I mean,
at the very least, just weed
Offhandedly.
exists, everybody.
Just so you know. No, that's it. I was just saying. Just
That's it. Just so
that's it.
very
That's
polite.
that's the whole thing.
What?
Yeah, just so you know, it's there.
Related to that profanity warning, I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and they had a similar kind of a thing kind of happen, you know? And one of the hosts just goes, well, really, this is for the parents, that he just goes, I'm sorry for making your kids so cool. And then that was the end of the day. I was like, it's true. That is how I feel about it.
Cool kids swear. Well, they're very cool to the other kids.
Yeah.
I think to the adults, it's just hilarious.
Yeah.
Or the most horrifying thing you've ever seen, you know, depending on your worldview.
Yeah.
Right. So, also, before we get into the rest of it, we'd like to thank our supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. If you'd like to help support this podcast, just go over there and just leave your banking details, wallet, credit card, just open it up and dump it out.
And if that seems like too
and don't worry
much,
about it.
go wishlist Crashlands 2 on Steam. Actually,
There you
either
go.
way, go do that definitely.
Yeah, definitely do that regardless, because that part, wish listing it is free, which is, that's good.
It just costs a little bit of your time to go sign in and stuff, you know? And if you're not even willing to do that for us, I'm not really sure what's this relationship.
What's this relationship? Yeah. I feel like we've been dragged along a little bit.
A little neglected. So
Yeah.
go wishlist Crashlands 2 on Steam.
Yeah, I've heard that a really good marketing tactic is guilt trips.
Yeah, we're
I
trying
think it works super good.
Trying something new.
All right, you guys. Now, because it's 420 episode, we got to blaze.
Yeah.
And by blaze, I of course mean answer a lot of questions, and by a lot, I mean
At least two.
two. Yeah, at least two. Meaning probably two.
Yeah.
So let's get into it. Now, of course, there's lots of Crashlands 2 development stuff that we're in the middle of, but it's pretty in the weeds, and we're doing a lot of wacky stuff, but it's going very well. So
It's in the
that's all I'm gonna say about that.
weeds.
All right, let's get into questions. And these questions come from our listeners at podcast.bscotch.net. And the highest upvoted question comes from Zeosock Veeryota, who says, my peeps, as an aspiring video game dev, I was told it was a good idea to start getting at least a few community members ASAP. So you can start building a community for your game. So you can start building a community for building your game with them. Sorry, I'm tripping over the phrasing here.
You're talking about kind of a building in public kind of a.
So instead of building something in isolation and then hoping that people like it afterwards. But I'm having a lot of trouble getting in touch with people. I'm not an expert communicator here. What can you recommend to start building a community of my own?
I think the first thing to say is that there's a little bit of cart before horsing going on here, right?
Yup.
Because if you haven't made games before, and so this is kind of your first venture, right? Then there's nothing really for your community to gather around besides your personality, right? Or something that you're producing that isn't the game actually, but is some other, game adjacent content. And
with an exception, which is if you're building a game. So I've really only seen this done a couple of times. Essentially, Forager and Stardew Valley. I've seen build up a community around the game before the game was actually launched. In the case of Stardew Valley, there was already a community for people wanting a Harvest Moon remake.
You could sort of hijack one.
Yeah, it was a hijack situation. That's hard to do. And it's also something that we tried to do with Levelhead. We were like, there's no sign of a new Mario Maker coming, but it's a great concept and it's very hard to execute. So not many other devs are going to be doing it. We will come in and bring a new game to this community. But then, of course, you run you run the risk of something like the game that you were making an homage to having a sequel release while you're making your game. And then the community is not there for your game anymore.
Well, and
right?
even deeper, you run the risk of misunderstanding what the community is revolving around, right? So,
right.
like in our case, in the case of Mario Maker, it's actually about Nintendo and Mario first, and about Mario Maker second. And we thought it was the other way, which is why we thought we could basically introduce something new into that space. But we can't.
We thought it was a genre, but it's actually just a game.
It's an IP, right? It's not really a genre. And I think with Stardew Valley, I think there was that missing hole in people's hearts from their childhoods, right? From like the game that they remembered, but actually not really the game they remembered, the way they remembered, right? Playing Harvest Moon, right? And so there was just a hole there, and it was actually a vibe that people wanted to recapture. It wasn't about the IP, right? But I believe he was part of this community, right? When he started working on it. So again, it's still a different thing, right? Because he was part of that community and then like was starting to build this thing and then talking about it while he was doing it.
Yeah, he's not paratrooping in and being like, "Hello, fellow children."
Yeah,
you know,
it's really people aren't going to tolerate that very well.
People detect that instantly. Yeah.
So you mentioned Forager.
So Forager had a different path, which was largely through itch.io and Hopfrog was the developer. And I think we chatted with Hopfrog back in
way back
South America.
17.
Yeah. So they basically had a demo up on itch.io that started getting traction. I think it started as a jam game actually.
Yeah.
And quite a few people played it and they kept expanding the demo and they essentially just kept the demo up to date for quite a long time. And you could play the demo for up to, I don't know, like an hour or something like that. And used that to sort of like keep enticing people into what the full game was going to be. And that's really genre dependent. I think you can't like have a partial demo of a city builder simulation game.
Yes.
Right. Because it's like, what makes the game fun is the fact that there's 1,000 things. Well, if there's only 20 things, a lot of
kinds of games don't come together until the very end, in the sense that basically in that same sort of way as like we think about the simulation genre. If you think about, if something like Stardew Valley, there's too many different systems that all have to be online before the singular experience of doing the activity is working, right? And so that's one of those things to watch out for too. So basically it comes down to, I think mainly you have to recognize what is the bonfire around which you are asking people to gather. Is it just the aspiration that you have for making a game? Because that is that's like a little piece of kindling on the ground with like the faintest little whiff of smoke on it.
Unfortunately, your desire to make your dream game is only interesting to you.
Yeah.
Like no.
Yes.
Everybody has heard about everybody else's cool game ideas, right? And until somebody can actually get their hands on it and play it, they just won't.
It's just smoke.
The proof is in the pudding, right?
So then I think
the community you're going to build, if that's kind of the approach, is going to be other early game developers who are also working on their first few things. And sharing tips and tricks. And there are a lot of communities for that. There's Reddit communities, Discord communities. There's tons of places you can go, and it wouldn't be
talk shop,
talk shop. Yeah. And it wouldn't be your community, right? But it would be a place that you belonged to, not that I guess belonged to you, right?
Well, I think that's the other sort of trap here though too, right? Which is the idea that by getting into the technical details of how you are doing things and sharing those with people, that you are building your games community. And again, you are not.
That's again,
the bonfire you're building around there is actually the making of games, not the game. So I think in general, the best strategy is to get something out in a playable form that actually very particularly is designed with an eye toward allowing people to discuss things about it. And that's part of the reason why roguelikes are so popular. If you have a game where every run is different and it doesn't take that many systems to come online before it actually is enjoyable to play, that's just a very easy bootstrap for a community to actually start around, because people can play the game like in the same sense as Forager or whatever else. Like even if it's just a few hours of even kind of grindy gameplay, like if it's a game that's up on itch, you will have people start showing up. But I think the piece of it that devs miss a lot, even if they have those two things, is not even asking people. It's like, is there a link on the main page of your game on itch to go join your Discord, for example, or your newsletter, or not? Very simple question. And like, if there's not,
Discord is the the easiest way to do it, because you don't have to set up any tech yourself. You don't have to do anything. You just basically make a server, right? And if you're very early on, if you're just set it up nicely and have really good rules and make sure that it's a friendly, welcoming environment, and you kick the assholes out, right? So if you do that stuff very early on, then as soon as you start sharing your game in a place where people can see it, as long as there's something about it that causes
you want to talk about
some people to come play it, right? The barrier to entry is so low for people to just like hop into a Discord channel, because they already have a bunch. They're logged into it right now, right? They're just going to click a link and be in there.
And of course, you kind of want to see, like, you want to, if you just started playing a game, even if it's on itch or something, and you're like having a good time, and it's like, it's interesting. I almost always pretty rapidly click into a Discord to see like what people are talking about. Are they talking about stuff that I like? Is it cool? People sharing screenshots and stuff, or people talk about builds or whatever.
Yeah, and I don't do it with weird games, but I do it with like all the software libraries I use.
Tech.
Right?
I
have. I guess I'm gonna look at my sidebar here. I've got
art channels.
Yeah, I've got a folder of 10 different servers that are just like various web tech libraries, right? That I just like keep a general eye on them, just kind of see what people are doing. Like all of them have like, showing off the stuff they're making with the libraries, just Q&A kind of stuff, right? And I think Discord has over the past small number of years become a really common place for people to go feel like they could just dive right into a community without having to, prove anything or know what they're going to be running into and whatever. So as long as you create a welcoming space, all of that said, you do need to keep in mind that, like, even if you do have something that people really like and you do manage to get in front of them, because all these things are already a challenge, right? To get something in front of people so they know your game exists. And then once they do that they play it. And then once they do that they follow the link to your Discord, right? That funnel is really, really dramatic.
You're talking, percents of percents.
Yeah, it's tiny, tiny, tiny. And so you have to also just be aware that if you do want to build in public, which you don't need to do, but it can kind of help keep you going once you get a few people who are into what you're doing, So it's definitely it's definitely a good for your mental sort of life while you're working on the long slog of trying to do this. Yeah, although I definitely recommend going and joining communities of people who are doing the same thing, because that's going to be a lot better guaranteed out of the gate for taking care of yourself, because the community building aspect is going to be extremely slow, almost guaranteed. And if we take it like our own community, like we started with, we had our forums forever.
We had forums, yeah.
And I think that was the
with
first
like 50 people in them or something like that.
Yeah, it was like, and it was, it was 50 people after a bit. And we put it up, I think, after Quadrupus Rampage. So that was when we already had,
I think so, yeah.
We already had like 1 million people play our games, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even still in our forum, we had 50 people, right? And then maybe like,
and we also,
it's
because we didn't
active, right?
We didn't link to any of this shit.
We didn't link to anything,
games. Yeah. So people had to be really trying to find it,
But even today though, like if you go into our Discord and see who are like our moderators, right? 2 of our moderators have been with us for 10 years.
Yeah.
Right. One since Quadrupus Rampage, and one shortly after that is mine, if I remember that correctly. And they were literally the first community members. Like they were the first ones in the door, and there were a bunch of other people who've kind of come and gone over the years, right? And every once in a while somebody comes back and I'm like, oh, that name sounds familiar. It's like really fun for everybody, but you'll have this cycle that you go through, but those early people, like those are the people who are just interested in having actually like a direct, real human interaction with somebody working on stuff. And there's a subset of people who just love being the first in the door, as you start to share stuff they're working on. But you do have to understand that like it's going to be a very tiny, tiny community that starts with. And if you do start to find success over time and grow that community, you also have to deal with the inherent conflict that creates of like the old guard who were there at the outset, right? And the new people who don't get it because they don't know literally every little fucking detail about what you've been up to. And that itself is its own thing, like there
can be gatekeeping or in groups, cliques, whatever. But honestly, I think the thing that I just want to make sure we we hone in on is the fact that a lot of times people get overly focused on this aspect of game development.
Yeah.
As if it's a thing that you can really do.
You can't
Yes.
do it.
So
You
to
can't
me, it
control
actually,
That's true.
yeah, it reminds me a lot of people talking about their like social media strategy. If you say like, how should we be tweeting to grow our Twitter following? And I am 100% unconvinced that tweeting is how you grow a Twitter following. You grow a Twitter following by doing stuff outside of Twitter that makes people go, wow, I bet this person has something to say that I would like to hear. Right.
I wonder if they have a Twitter.
Yeah. So like we've kind of in the past gone through and looked at like different developers or different companies or whatever. And it's, you can look at like Apple's Twitter where they've got several million Twitter followers and they have never tweeted. But, right. So it's like,
Is that still true? I know it was at least true the last time we
it
talked
was
about
true
this,
a few years ago and I stopped checking because they don't tweet. Like, why would I ever look, right?
Well, yeah, but you can also like think about this for yourself too, right? Because if you're on Twitter, if you're not on Twitter or any of these communities, don't just jump in there and try to start creating because like people can tell you're new and it's weird, right? So become like part of the ecosystem first. But if you're in Twitter or one of these other places, ask yourself, why do I follow the people I follow, right? And there's a pretty good chance that the same kind of reasoning is why people would follow you, and it's very likely not, oh, I saw their tweets and I wanted more of those, right?
Yeah, it's like if somebody appears on Twitter and they just start tweeting about their really great game idea, right? And they're like working on this game and blah blah, and then like over the course of years, they're tweeting several times a day and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, ultimately, whether I actually buy the game is going to come down to the game, and whether I join a community about the game is how much that game kind of hooks me in, and it doesn't have anything to do with what the developer has been tweeting, right? It's about like the rest of the players.
Oh,
and it's
yeah.
about the
Unless
community
what they've been tweeting
ecosystem.
is how you discovered like that the game exists and like discovered that info, right? So, because actually a lot of the games I found recently, like Paleo Pines, I'm very excited about. It's just like a cute hanging out with
Dinosaur
dinosaurs stuff,
Yes.
like it's adorable. I didn't know this existed until I saw the devs posting videos on Twitter of the game, right? Because like, which to me is like that's just an ad, right? It's a way to like put the actual game content in my face, right? But if they just started talking about making a game with dinosaur stuff, like you're saying, then I've seen a million of those. I don't care.
I think that the general point is that it's a lagging indicator of the work you are doing. So if you're trying to do it directly, you're going to waste a tremendous amount of energy that you should be just putting into the game. And all you need to do is basically just set up a nice, think about like a house party. Okay. It's like if you're walking down the street and there's just a door open, you're not going to be like, what's going on in there? I should go in there. No, it looks creepy. It looks like maybe if you go in there, you're going to die. Who knows? Maybe someone died in there. You don't know what's going on. But if you walk by and you hear like a bunch of people having a great time and there's like loud music, people are bopping, people coming in and out, and there's like clearly something's happening there and people are having a very good time, you want to participate, right?
You might take a peek.
You might take a peek or be like, oh, I wonder what's going on there. Or at least, take a moment, right? And so when you think about what you're doing with your game, it's like you want to have that, you have the music going, you have the setup ready such that when people arrive, then they can, enjoy themselves. But if you were just opening the door to a house, it's just fucking weird. And like, it's not good. It doesn't invite the right kind of
Well,
stuff.
this is the network effect problem,
Yes.
right? Like nobody wants to join a community that has nobody in it, but if every community starts that way. And so the other hard part is kind of like reaching some kind of critical threshold where you have to believe that you have enough. If you're going to be the one who's actually doing the work to form the community, whether it's like making your subreddit or your Discord or whatever, you want to try to hit a point where you believe that there's enough people interested that when you finally provide that space for them to gather, that at least some healthy number of people will appear right out of the gate. Because if somebody joins your Discord and they are completely by themselves, and then over the course of the next 2 days they are still totally by themselves, that just feels like a weird like group chat, right?
And that's like, why I think thinking about it, where your game is the thing people are actually trying to gather around, right?
Exactly.
And Discord is like a space generated, a little bubble around the game. And if you don't have something out already, then it is just extremely challenging to do that.
Well, and in so many cases, I would say for for all of the game communities that I'm involved in, none of them are moderated or run by the developers.
Correct. Yeah.
Right. Because like that's something that the players do on their own around your game. It's not necessarily something that you yourself. To me, it's a lot like when we talk about companies being like, here's our revenue target for this year. Right. And it's like, you don't just decide how much money you're going to get. Yep. You decide what you're going to make and how you're going to try to sell it. And then the revenue you get is an ultimate consequence of that further downstream. Right. So you don't get to just say, we're gonna make $10 million this year, or we're gonna have 300,000 users in our forums, or what. Like that's just the result of some other stuff that happened in between. So as long as you just focus on that stuff, making a really good game, and honestly, this is something that we have gone back and forth a lot about with our designs of our games, is whether or not certain game features or quality of life things or whatever will inhibit or promote the growth of a community, right? So it's also something
you basically end up thinking about the game not just as a contained thing as far as like the code and the direct player experience, but how supportive of community interaction the game itself is. And that can mean sometimes that what you need to do is not put certain kinds of information into the game.
Or not so explicitly necessarily. Because people like to figure things out and then share that
stories
with each other, right?
Yeah, well, there's all kinds of stuff too, right? Because you can take like original Crashlands, which has way more players cumulatively than Levelhead does, right? But if you look on our Discord, like Levelhead is by far the most active topic, right? And the second most
just a lot more to talk
is
about.
just it's just people talking to each other about random stuff, right? And then Crashlands is like way down the list, right? Because they're people like ask a few questions here and there about quests they're stuck on, but it's just a Q&A. That's all it is, right? There's not the interactive component that we get out of Levelhead, which was designed completely for community interaction, right? So you have to keep those things in mind. But I do think the most important idea here, though, is just to take a step back from the idea that like you should be building a community if you're starting to get into games. Yes, because I don't think that that's true. I don't think it's possible, honestly, because there's nothing, as we said, there's nothing for a community to gather around unless it's around you, right?
Yeah, there are exceptions, but not very many. So it's possible.
There are exceptions, but not for you.
Yeah, I would not use it as your.
Don't use exceptions as like your template, right?
Yeah.
So I just don't think that's a good use of your time, because also at the beginning, like we said, like the growth is extremely slow. The funnel is so tight that you're going to you'll be very lucky if you are able to actually get a few people early on, right? As you're just starting the process. And for most people, that's going to just be a bummer. And so you're basically like, by focusing on community, you're sort of sabotaging your efforts to build games if you're new. The community you should be seeking is the one that can support you in the endeavor, which is, again, other people who are also early on trying to figure all this out, so that you're part of the community instead of trying to like create one around your game. And I think that's what I would do if I were starting anew, is just try to find people who can help me. I can help them. We can talk shop and figure stuff out.
I would spend like an afternoon making two dumb nets. One is basically a basic Discord channel, and the other one a very basic email form. Now, I'm not actually sending emails through because that would take a minute, but just to have it. And then I would have links to those on the stuff I was making, and then I would just be making games.
Yeah. I wouldn't even do the Discord until I had enough people like signed up for my newsletter that I was like, okay, there's because again, you don't want that like empty space that people pop into.
Then use the newsletter to launch the Discord.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you get nice. And I think that strategy of like broadcast first in a way that's measurable.
Yeah,
right?
no, that's smart. Honestly, it's good.
Yeah, you're talking outwards, and you can get a sense of stuff. That could also be a Twitter following or a TikTok following, whatever, right? But like, go to spaces where people aren't joining into an empty forum, right? But where you are talking to people, and it doesn't matter how many are there because they're not talking to each other. That's not the purpose of that. So Twitter, newsletter, whatever. Right? So start with that and have that be the thing that you link to and try to get people into as you start posting stuff up. And like, you can have a blog, you can post dev logs about what you're up to. There's all kinds of stuff that you can do if you're into that kind of thing to try to capture people's interest with the work you're already doing, with like a little bit of extra work on top, right? But you don't want to make it so that the work that you're doing is actually just trying to build that community around something that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So start with that, and then once that gets big enough that you think you can build a group of people who can actually talk to each other, then create your Discord servers and whatever. And the whole time, find actual game dev communities to
support you.
Yep.
Because the shit's hard.
Yeah. But bearing in mind that that's just for your mental health. Those aren't your players. Those are
Correct.
just other developers.
Which is, and we see this confusion a lot too in like the indie game space. Is in essence indie devs trying to sell their games to each other, right?
Yeah.
And
which really you're just helping the platform in the middle take 30% of your money as you just move it around between each other.
there is like, because it is the case that you need pretty small numbers actually to like juice algorithms and stuff to get things going, right? And so that
there's value in the network.
There is value there,
Yeah.
but but that's not your player base, and that's not where you're going to find success, right? But it can definitely be very helpful, and at the least for your mental health while you're, because making games is a very solo, quiet, kind of isolating affair. So finding people,
whatever helps, you know. Our next question comes from Challosis, who says, have you tried other user-generated content maker games like Super Dungeon Maker or Meet Your Maker? I haven't played those two.
Those both came out more recently.
We tried a bunch during Levelhead development, but I don't remember which ones.
Yeah, like Geometry Dash was the one that really popped out a lot.
Geometry Dash.
That's probably the most successful non-Mario Maker game. Yeah, by a pretty wide margin.
Yeah, I looked into because Super Meat Boy actually had an online platform builder component thing for a very brief window, and then they shut it down. So there's we look at a bunch of these, but we were doing that work. But since then, no. Yeah,
actually, I think we actually downloaded and played like 15 or 20 different mobile ones.
Yes,
as well, because we were like, well, are there how do mobile maker games work? And the thing that we kept running into, which ultimately kind of killed it, because do you guys ever play Neverwinter? So Neverwinter,
the Dungeon Maker thing, right?
It was like 2010 or something, and it was an MMO. It was an MMO which had a dungeon. It was all about dungeons, so you could build dungeons that had all kinds of scripted stuff and boss fights and stories.
It was basically a game engine.
It's basically a D&D campaign MMO with mini campaigns. But the problem is as with this plus all of the other games we looked at is they all make the same fatal mistake, which is they attach some kind of experience system or something that is pretty easily gamed based on how you've built your dungeons or your levels or whatever. And then all of the levels or dungeons that get recommended to you are 10x XP farm dungeon or coin farm 3000, right? And so then you can't play anything fun or interesting because every level is just a min-max thing, right?
The incentives have to be managed so carefully for that kind of a game.
Yeah. So that informed everything about how we thought about how levels and level head get promoted and how they move through the system and how do we make it so that even if somebody does try to do something like that it turns out to not be beneficial to them or doesn't actually contaminate the pool. So that's where all the stuff we did with exposure bucks and the marketing department and how levels graduate and then get recommended, it's all these different algorithms we put together, which honestly worked.
That works great.
We solved those problems, but it turns out that those problems, for whatever reason, people don't care.
Well, no, I would say they matter a lot for someone who's already playing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you have to be playing the game first, and then it matters.
Yeah, it's that definition, the distinction between, I think it's Mike Rose from No More Robots, was talking about the hook and the kicker, right, for your game.
Right.
And it's very hard to distinguish between the two, and devs usually get it completely wrong.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why our Levelhead community is still fucking active, right? It's not a big community, but it's highly engaged. They're doing really cool, wild stuff, right?
And made a whole campaign themselves.
They made a whole custom campaign.
It's awesome.
Yeah, they're doing wild stuff, and it's basically because once you get in the door, if it's the kind of thing you're into, then you're not being kicked out by bad incentive alignments, right, from the whole community. And the only real exception, the only case we've had any trouble at all is actually coming from achievements, that extra layer on top of incentives, where And we were also really careful about that. We only have like one thing that can end up being used wrong. And even then, like somebody has to really want to use it wrong, right? And so fortunately, like that's been like the main cause of it, but it's been like one every few months kind of a person we have to kick, right? Or mute out of the system. But we have a mechanism for that too, because we were prepared for that case of the incentives not quite working the way we intended.
Yeah, that's fair. I should say, yeah, all the considerations we put in, you know, they don't get people into the door. That's not the hook. Like once we have people playing the game, they're like, oh, this is great. Like this solves all the problems that I had with Mario Maker or, you know, whatever else. But yeah, that doesn't attract people in. And actually, yeah, and if you go back and look at like our original Crashlands trailers that we did, you know, it's kind of the same thing, which is like we spent a lot of time in those trailers kind of like listing features that were essentially it's like a slap chop ad, right? It's like, hey, have you ever had this problem? Well, our game solves it, right? Like we have infinite inventory, and blah, blah, you know, which people don't play games to solve a problem they had in a different game. Correct. They play a game because it looks fun and interesting, and if it happens to solve one of those problems, like, oh, nice.
Then they're happy.
But you're not gonna play a game just because it has infinite.
Yeah, it's like it's one of the things like I hate inventory management. It's the number one thing that stops me from playing any game that I ever play. Right. That said, even when I know a game is going to have inventory management I have to deal with, if I still like the game, I'll still go play it until I get tired. Of the
you play shitload of Terraria, Valheim, like all these things with inventories, right? Because it's like it's a thing that annoys you, but it's not. It doesn't matter when you make a decision about playing a game.
Yeah, for the first time.
Start.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all about because I have a group of friends who have been playing Valheim together now for I played with them originally, and they've been playing like once a week or more for 6 months or something, you know. Mm-hmm. And I stopped playing basically 6 months ago because the last time I played, I had to take 15 minutes to like deal with inventory, and I was like, and I just got so mad I couldn't do it ever again, you know. And I knew that was going to happen though because I'd played Valheim a whole bunch before that with my wife at a different time.
Yeah,
and I still played again until I got to that point, you know.
Yep.
Yeah, once you need spreadsheets and an organizational schema that you need to communicate amongst your group to make sure you know which chest has which items and why and how, then it's like, okay, this is. I just want to go shoot some dinosaurs and go into the jungle.
But importantly, you know, like Seth, you were talking about the way we were framed the original Crashlands and stuff. And we talked about this a lot, frankly, on those podcasts over the years. Is not knowing and not being able to pick an angle, basically, and stick to it as far as experientially what that game was about, such that we could just communicate it to someone, right? And so, what fills that void for most devs, ourselves included, typically ends up being just a list of either features or improvements to problems that typically are deep in the play experience of that genre, like inventory management or whatever else. And it's like that just doesn't get people in the door per se.
It just doesn't. It's It's an interesting and fun problem. And this honestly kind of comes back to what we're talking about with like growing a community, right? Like there are things that as a developer, you're going to spend a lot of time thinking about that are super interesting to you. And that you're really excited that you've managed to like solve this problem or something that you've never seen solved in another game. And it is cool and it is interesting, but to you, right? Yes. But it just doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things because people buy games on vibes. Like they go by the feel, they go for does this like capture the imagination, you know? And so like,
and even if they're interested in principle in the weeds, they just cannot have enough context. There's just no way for them to be able to appreciate.
Because if you have an infinite inventory in a game that sucks, it doesn't really matter. Or in a game that's like in an art style that you just can't stand, or in a setting where you're just like, well, it has infinite inventory and that's cool, but I don't really want to play as a caveman or whatever, right? Like I'm more interested in sci-fi games or something like that. So like there's all kinds of reasons why it just doesn't matter that you solve this interesting problem, you know? So just try to, make sure you take that angle. But yeah, so as far as like other, I don't know, user-generated games, that's where I should say probably for all of us, that's where most of our gameplay went, was like in our research and development phase for Levelhead. They're hard. Like they're just hard to do. And also if you're assuming that multiplayer games are not inherently user-generated, because of course, like anytime you're playing with other people, whatever happens in the game is user-generated because people are crazy, right? So if you kind of ditch that angle and it's just about like playing levels or content or whatever, then yeah. Our next question comes from IllegallySam, who says, would you guys be interested in ever doing some kind of developer-commentated speed run for one of your games? Whether it be something like one of those live GDQ type runs with the developer giving commentary with the speedrunner, or one of those developers react to a blank minute speed run of their game. Videos that have popped up over the last few years. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that kind of content and if you'd ever want to do one for yourselves.
I think it's hilarious. So yeah.
So I would say I would react, but I don't actually have the knowledge about Levelhead to be a commentator because I programmed the game, but our speedrunning community
whack shit for so long.
They've got names for techniques that I don't even know
Well,
about.
that's the Google Doc.
There it is, yeah. But I think that's always true, though, right? But I think as like a commentator, it's less about. It actually is more about reactions and then like getting into some of the weeds, right, from your perspective. So that because I think it would be like I don't know enough about basically any of our games to be able to do this, really, because like I didn't make any of them, right? I'm more peripheral than that. Otherwise, I would still have a good time, like sitting down with somebody and like from what I can remember vaguely, right? But what I would really love to have, like, especially with Levelhead, to have like one of our community top speedrunners just sit down with Seth, so that Seth gets to witness just how horribly they can break the game, you know, and like see his reactions in real time, but also see him because like it's already fun. I think Sam can attest, like when things go wonky in any of our games, watching Seth's face as he tries to figure out why that happened, you know, is just
Seth
one of
has
the most fun.
Literally has the whole code library for the game.
It's all in his brain, right? Yeah. So he's like filing. Yeah.
Yep.
It's like ruffling
It's
through
hilarious.
all the files.
Yep. And then he goes, oh, that's it.
Yeah, I know where that is.
Fuck.
Or if it's in development, he'll just go, don't worry about that, and then move on to the next thing. Right.
Yeah. Don't worry about that.
So yeah, I would have a blast watching that happen. And I think Sam also has enough like in the weeds knowledge of like all, because I think speedrunning is weird because it's so technical, right?
Yeah.
So for that specifically, I think Seth would be really fun to watch that.
Yeah,
happen.
my mainly on the design side, which is like why certain pieces of tech why they are able to come out of other things we were trying to do. Right.
Yeah.
Like by virtue of having these coyote jumps, which is for this other purpose, then now you guys could do this ridiculous abuse of our package system or whatever. I feel like I would just be screaming the whole time because it's just I've seen it, especially with the game like Levelhead, which is fast. Like I think there's different ones with I think I might have watched I think it was probably there's a Hades one, Hades speedrun thing. It was like 8 minutes or something, like 13 minutes or some shit. And it's just like, it's so fun. It is fun to watch, but like, as the person who like very much tried to design an experience around it or made it, I feel like mostly I'd just be sort of shocked. And then it's just over before you begin. And you're like, that took me 4 years to make this for you. And you just did it in 8 minutes. And I don't know how to feel about this,
But to get there, they probably practiced for dozens of hours.
It's a Picasso situation.
Yeah, it took them 4 years of nonstop playing to do it in 8 minutes.
No, that's cool.
I mean, ultimately, I'd say that sounds fun, and I'm willing to humor the idea, provided I don't have to organize such an event. Like if I get invited, I'd be like, yeah, I think that would be fun. But yeah, no to organizing, yes to participating. 100%. All right. Last question. Wow, we've done 3 and we're on to 4.
Crap. We really are
blazing. We're blazing. Comes from Coobra Nookrag, who says, this is a question primarily for Sam. How did you redesign Crashlands 1 characters for Crashlands 2? Is there any secret style sheet that you used in order to channel the magics of creation into turning the Tendrom into not completely pathetic creatures? Tell me how you'd translate a Bamley into the Crashlands 2 style, which those are the walruses with butt cheeks, I believe.
Yeah, they do.
Teleporting walruses.
I forgot about that. Yeah. Teleporting walruses with basically drill heads that impale on the ground, and then you can see their butt.
And they also are electrified.
Also, there's electricity involved.
They're sort of a butt cheek walrus Pikachu mole.
Yeah, we haven't actually we don't have any butt cheeks yet in Crashlands 2, which I'm a little disappointed about because there's butt cheeks everywhere in all the other
So far, nothing looks away from the camera in true keeping with Crashlands aesthetic.
Well, I'll keep this in mind because we got some boss fights to develop soon. So
It would be kind of hilarious
if we have
there was
some-
one.
I was gonna say we have some butt cheeks. We don't need it because it's just butt cheeks. But I think we should also have a setting that'll put a little sensor bar or blur out the butt cheeks,
With butt cheeks.
just because that's hilarious. Like,
For some
I would
reason, that
on
makes it
just
feel
because
like it's dirtier. You know what I
I
mean?
know that's why it's so fun.
Yeah, as far as translation goes, so we've talked a little bit about how the dev process for Crashlands 2 has been very different from the last couple of games because first and foremost we swapped tools for
All of them except Game Maker, but
Yeah.
every other tool.
yeah, and then also within Game Maker though,
Yeah,
enough,
Game Maker's
like,
changed so much.
yeah, basically a bunch of things happen that essentially we're just using a completely different tool set, completely different art pipeline, everything. So the reality is that the style that I use now is the result of a particular kind of process for making the art that I've developed in order to be able to make all of the art as fast as possible for a game that looks better than the original Crashlands. So it's not that there's a style guide so much as there, well, I guess there is. There's just literally if you do a particular set of things with layer order in Clip Studio Paint at the scale I'm working at, you'll get something that looks kind of like what the stuff looks like as far as feel.
It's a consequence of the process rather than a prescriptive explanation of like what the style is and how things are supposed to look.
Yes. Yeah. And, I've always been fond of kind of the just more elaborate or more fun shapes and stuff like that when things are moving. So I've been trying to push that a lot for this sequel because in the original I didn't animate like anything.
Oh yeah, stuff doesn't
Basically
move
all.
that much, really. Like
No.
yeah,
Because I loved hearing people's comments about like Flux's walk animation being translated into this new style was very funny because I was like, calling it an animation, the first one is generous, folks. Generous. Okay. Technically it moves was what I
and
would
the first game, it's literally Flux has variables just for the intended direction or the intended angle for each of her four limbs, right? So it's like, oh yeah, my back arm should be at 0 degrees and my forward arm should be at 180 degrees. And so
she doesn't have
Flux is-
joints, right? She doesn't have elbows or knees, so
just shoulders
no
and hips.
joints. Yeah. And so literally it's just like in various ways of as she's moving around and stuff, we just have scripts running that just dictate what direction each limb should be pointing. And that's what creates the run cycle and the, like even the attack animations, right? It's like just swing the arm by just moving it up above
which
and
is
then rotate it down.
animation in the sense it's animated, right? But it's not animated from a drawing perspective, right? It's not like
I would say it's animated in the sense that it has been made to move, but in the sense that it has been, as you'd say, brought to life, which is what animation is. It's a little less clear that that's what's happening, right? Because I think when you go to swing a sword and only your arm moves, it's not particularly bringing something to life because there's not like a lot going on there, right? So I think largely, I think it's been an interesting thing is seeing people's reactions to the updated, the like new method, because really actually my focus has been on bringing the emotional intent of the game into every single thing, every animation, every single frame, every design, whatever else. So what I mean by that is Flux's walk being kind of like the cornerstone for me of like what the game is supposed to feel like, because you're going to be staring at that all the time. It's kind of just like a weird, dumb, fun. Someone just tried real hard, but it is, I don't know. It's fun.
Well,
and
I just
dumb.
think about it this way. What would Crashlands 2 feel like if we animated a regular ass walk cycle into Flux?
Exactly.
yeah, it would not feel like Crashlands.
No.
Yeah. And plus, there's also something kind of interesting about the perspective and the fact that Crashlands 2 is 2D. Mm-hmm. Like I was mentioning earlier, nothing in Crashlands looks away from the camera.
Correct.
Right? If you saw a character facing away from the camera, it would suddenly shatter the illusion because like, wait a minute, nothing else does this. Right? Everybody is always looking at like a 2/3 view basically or something off to one side. And it somehow just feels totally fine, right? But
I think
one
we
thing
learned
that's
that
kind
in
of weird about
Quadrupus
that.
Rampage, didn't we, with like the enemies? Because like in Quadrupus Rampage, the Quadrupus does turn around,
Correct.
right?
Yep.
And like Sam spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to like draw that
Very
from all those
annoying.
perspectives and
Yeah.
stuff.
But the enemies just flip.
The enemies just flipped right. And then there was one of those things when we talked to people about that, they hadn't noticed that the enemies don't
Yep.
The
look
enemies never turn
different directions
away
right?
from the camera. Yep.
Yeah, so we learned that for original Crashlands, and then have done it that way ever since because nobody fucking notices that.
But there's an interesting visual consequence of this, which is if you have something that stays stuck to the ground, like a regular walk cycle as it's walking around, you will notice this more.
Yes.
Versus if you have something that's bouncing, because something that's bouncing, it breaks contact with the ground and it's rarely touching the ground in a continuous fashion. And somehow that makes it feel more.
Oh yeah, because if you imagine
correct.
because otherwise it looks like moonwalking, kind of like sideways moonwalking, right? Because if someone's like doing a walk cycle to the left, because that's the only way they can do a walk cycle is to the left or right, and then they're moving straight up, right?
Yep.
That's just a weird sideways
you notice.
moonwalk.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And so we do that with, for example, we'll have like these little, alien creatures that have like 6 limbs and they're like really flat on the ground and they scuttle around. And for those, it feels okay because we don't have like a good mapping in our brain for how that's supposed to look, when something is walking around like that. But if it's just a regular walk cycle where your feet aren't really like breaking contact with the ground and stuff, and then you were moving vertically on the screen, but while facing left or right, it would feel weird. And so it's like the bounce is part of that,
Yeah, I think it really comes down to just like the overall spirit of the original one being so much about just kind of goofiness and feeling slapstick, even though we had no we actually didn't we couldn't really do any slapstick humor in it from a kind of more complex perspective. Taking that idea and like trying to just bake it into every single thing in this new one, and that meant then taking a different approach for the tools, using spine, doing all this stuff. But you'll notice there are very few, almost no slow animations. What I mean by that is, so we're talking about walk cycles. I hate walk cycles that are, I think kind of what you guys are talking about is basically slow ones, where
They look like walking.
They look like walking. And the reason I hate them is because, one, shitload of work, right? I've got time for this. I cannot.
It's a lot of work for a very boring thing.
Exactly. Right. So if I'm going to be doing a lot of work, it better evoke some response, not just get the job done of making it look like someone's walking from A to Z, right? I don't want to do that. So most things are fast, also because smears mean that I also don't have to do nearly as much work. So the only times that I've like bumped into some stuff recently in the last couple of months where I've been like, ooh, is where someone has requested on the team a feature that would require slowness in motion for like flux or something like that. Because I just know that my choice is either to do a bajillion frames to make the effect work.
That are all almost the same, right?
Yeah, they're all almost the same.
Yeah.
Or to use spine to do almost like what was done in the original. Yeah, which is just like, it's not really animating, but it's like, you're rotating, I don't know, rotating an elbow or something to like make it look like you're rubbing something in or whatever. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just not super excited.
Yeah, in those cases, we just try to, wherever we can, still default to doing some code-based animation where we can just like squish a thing or let it like kind of drift around or rotate, just because, like Sam's saying, getting those kinds of like rhythmic but semi-random small movements over a long period of time, like
brutal.
Animating that by hand is just, it's just dumb. It's just a dumb waste of time.
It's so much.
Well, yeah, especially because like in the game context, you want everything to feel like it's alive, right? So like you want everything to be kind of doing something all the time, right? But the sheer amount of animation, in the sense of like drawing frames to make that happen, is astonishing. I think it's like, and when you do see that, when you see games that like go all in on that, like Cuphead, and some of these things, like it has a whole vibe. Like you can tell, like it's its own thing, right? And it's super cool, it's super fun. But also, every time I played any of those games, they always felt clunky, because
they cannot be fast enough.
They can't, because they're trying. The animations all have to get shown, right? And so they all just take time. Which isn't to say they are fun and great, because many of them are, but it's a inherent limitation of going all in on drawn animations and allowing them to be slow.
Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question because it's a hard one to put words
Well,
on.
I'd say it is. To me, it's actually similar to what we're talking about with community building, right? Which is like in the case of the art, what it ends up looking like is a consequence of a bunch of process things and constraints and tools, right? So like we're using Spine, we're using Clip Studio Paint, we're using Game Maker. It's 2D. all these things kind of come together to sort of create a set of
it also has to work
constraints
on any form factor, right? So like it has to be visually as intended on a tiny ass phone or a big screen TV, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So all that stuff kind of comes into play, and then as the art that comes out is if we tried something different, where we said like, oh yeah, it's going to be photorealistic and we're going to do like full 360 rotations of the character, like if that was our intended outcome, then we would actually use a completely different set of tools, right? And then the style would change as a consequence of the tools and all of that. So just like with the community stuff we're talking about, a community emerging as a consequence of you having done a bunch of other stuff that a community can form around. It's not necessarily a community forms because you formed one, right?
Yeah.
You don't like start with the endpoint. The endpoint's the consequence of all the other
that's also
stuff.
their analogy too, right? Because in terms of like being able to control it and that aspect of things, right? Like in retrospect, you can describe how the community formed. And when you do that, it makes it sound like somebody could follow the steps and get that outcome, which is just not how that works, right?
Yes.
And similarly with like looking at an art style, you could like work backwards and say, oh, okay, well, I can describe it in this way, right? Because of all these things, right? But that's not how it's actually being generated, right? And so it's again not the same.
Or it's not how you would get there. It's not,
Right,
how you would come to have generated that style, right? Because I think that's the thing. Like the reality is that actually it's easier now. It would be easier now for me to port the creation of assets to another artist because of layers and stuff like that, where like you can basically see much more about how the pieces are built, and there's actually a lot more like kind of locked in stuff. But yeah, getting to a point where you have that recipe developed is that's the tricky part that I don't.
It's like a game design document, right? It's like you can either claim that you know it's going to happen, write it all down, and then there you go, right? Or
and then be wrong.
Yeah, or anytime we've had to write a game design document for anybody, we just look at what we've done and then describe that, right? And then send that off instead.
Yep, we designed it. Nope. All right, well, I hope that answers the question. Man, we got 4 done today. We really blazed it. I feel good.
A good 420.
So that means next week we'll do 20 questions. No, we'll probably still just do one.
Probably do one. It's 421. That's just one.
But this does mean, we're burning through questions. Get more of them onto the podcast.bsketch.net page, because we've got tons of Crashlands 2 stuff that we're working on. If anybody wants to, know more about that, just like this question with the art, we appreciate those questions. So ask away. And that's all the time we have for this week. We'd like to thank our producers Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta for putting the podcast together. And thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, you can just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the archives. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week.
Goodbye.
Bye.